Thanks for tuning in to Lucid Cafe. I'm your host, Wendy Halley. In today's episode, I talk with Nina Thompson. We had such a great conversation. I really enjoyed talking with Nina. We ended up talking about death. Now, the very reason you might be tempted to turn this podcast off is the very reason why I hope you'll give it a listen. I think it's crazy important that we talk about death. It's the only thing that we know for sure is going to happen. But our conversation is one where we go all over the place. We talk about the fact that people don't want to talk about death. And we talk about our own experiences with death in our own lives, as well as our spiritual experiences around death. So we do cover a lot of ground and have some fun along the way. So let me tell you a little bit about Nina. Nina Thompson, she founded the WakeUpDenying Project in 2012. And currently is consulting with organizations that are working in the death awareness movement. So she brings over 20 years of entrepreneurial and business consulting experience to the industry. She's experienced in community organizing, project management, event production, political campaigns, and organizational development. Nina's crazy passionate about her work, which led to her founding and managing the WakeUpDenying Project. She's worked in hospice as a chaplaincy volunteer, and she has a Zen meditation practice, which she discusses in our conversation. In 2014, Nina completed the certificate program in Foundations in Buddhist Contemplative Care at the New York Zen Center for Contemplative Care. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Nina Thompson. Well, Nina, thanks for coming on the podcast. Appreciate it.
I'm excited to be here.
Well, I've been wanting to talk to you since I had this idea to sort of do this podcast because of your background around death. So I just want to ask you, why do you think in our culture we struggle with death?
It's the great unknown. We have no idea what's going to happen. And I think that lets our imaginations run wild. So we don't think about it. We reject thinking about it. We avoid thinking about it. And I think if we actually did, we would pay more attention to the way we live, which is a really important thing to think about when we're thinking about death and dying.
Absolutely. So how did you get into the project that you created?
The WakeUpDenying Project.
Yep.
The WakeUpDenying Project it died. It died last July 2017. But the WakeUpDenying Project was a nonprofit with the mission to encourage people to think and talk about dying. We did these events. We did these big events, 4-day-long events where we invited people from the community to explore death and dying in a way that made sense to them. So there are multiple points of entry into this event. You could walk through the audio story tent and listen to stories about waking or death and dying and life. You could go to the big chalkboard and write your bucket list item, and you could go into a brochure tent and get a bunch of literature about funerals, home funerals, traditional funerals, death doulas, hospice, elder lawyer, So if you were a practical sort of person, you could walk through that tent. And then there was 4 days of workshops, panel presentations. So anyway, we were trying to create a way for people to explore death and dying in a way that resonated with them. And it worked. It was a very successful event. For 5 years, we ran that organization. But you asked me how I got there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a longer story.
I've got time.
Excellent. So I think the beginning of it was when my dad died, actually. I wasn't very close to him. He and we loved each other. We only spoke maybe once a year, maybe a couple of times a year on holidays. for a while we didn't speak at all, but then he started calling on like Thanksgiving and birthdays and such. And he asked me for a photo of my dog. He said, I'd like a photo of my grand dog. I was like, okay, your grand dog. Great. I'll send you a picture of your grand dog. And then I never did. And every time he talked to me, I got busy, people get busy. We don't think about, that death can come at any moment. We get busy with our life and we forget about it. And every time he would call on holidays or birthdays, and he would ask me for that picture. And I did really want to send it to him. And the next time I got a call about him, it was that he was in ICU, brain dead. And that as the oldest child, I had to go make a decision about what to do for him. So I went to Minnesota and, unplugged him. But I did bring a picture of his grand dog with me. And I gave it to them so that the funeral home, so that they would cremate him with the picture. Because I did actually want to follow through on that promise. And he actually would have thought that was very funny. He would think that was hilarious that I did that. So anyway, I wanted to build a box for his ashes. And this was 13 years ago now. So this was a long time ago, before this home funeral, do it yourself kind of thing movement has taken off. And I went to my grandmother, who was still alive, and my brother, and I said, I'm going to build a box for his ashes. And they said, don't be ridiculous. Don't be ridiculous, my grandmother said. Just go to the funeral home and buy a box. That's what they do. And I said, well, I'm a lesbian from Vermont, and that's what we do. We build things. So, and she couldn't say anything to that, which was good. So I did go build a box for his ashes, but I had no idea how to build a box. And I don't have a wood shop, a lesbian without a wood shop. And I had to find somebody to help me build it. And I found this guy who I sort of knew, and it was the most beautiful, contemplative experience that I'd had. It was this beautiful farm in Vermont. And I would be working with him on the machine, and then I would go outside and I would cry and I would come back in, and he had kept the box moving through the process, and he would show me silently where we were. He put his hand on mine to push it through a machine, and it was so intimate, really beautiful. And at the end, he handed me this box and some sanding paper and said, thank you. And I cried and I thanked him. And I thought I was in love with this man now. I was like, I love him. And I thought, God, we have missed something. We have completely missed something. We are missing it now. We have been removed from death and dying, and we have nothing to gain from that. Absolutely nothing to gain from that.
What a powerful experience.
Yeah. And I felt determined at that moment. Especially, I went back and put the box down in front of my family. And there was not really a reaction to it. It was beautiful. Oh, it's very nice.
But they didn't go through what you went through to make that box.
Exactly. They did not heal in a way that I did. And I knew I had been sort of consciously grieving and healing over those 6 months. There was a time between his death and our memorial. And I thought, this is terrible. I have to do something about this. I was absolutely determined to return people to death and dying. And that started, that was 13 years ago, like I said. We have to get back to it. How do we do that? So I had the idea then that I would create a cooperative funeral home on a big mountaintop in Vermont, an old white farmhouse, and that I wanted a green burial cemetery across the street. I wanted it to be an inn where people could stay, because we don't get together except at funerals and weddings.
Sure.
But what if we could put them all in an inn? And we could have a big farm table that people could sit around and be given home cooked food. And there'd be a little library with books and audio stories. So audio stories were there. But it was long before the big green burial thing was going on. So there weren't as many resources then to help me create that. And there were a lot of laws preventing it from happening. I got a lawyer. I examined a business plan to see if I could create this sort of community run funeral home on a hill. And it just wasn't going to be a money maker. Not just not a money maker. I couldn't survive on it. So I put it down and I thought I would turn to that idea. But the idea of bringing community back to death and dying never left. And then the next thing that happened was I was invited to do a feasibility study on a residential hospice here in central Vermont. And for various reasons, that didn't work out either. But there was this audio story component there too. Like, I wanted to bring audio stories into the chapel in a hospice, sharing voices of the volunteers, of the patients, of the people who have lost somebody, of the staff. And to me, it mimicked what I was thinking about at the funeral home idea, that there was community voices. And it started to become clear to me that we need to learn from each other. We need to learn about death and dying, these secrets. Like, we have all the wisdom. So how can we share our own wisdom with each other? And then the next opportunity that came was I met a woman named Erica Heilman. And as we were talking, actually before she came over to talk, I knew we were going to be creating an organization together. It was intuition. It was clear. And I remember when she walked in the door, I said, you and I are going to start an organization together. And she looked at me like I had three heads because I didn't even know her. And she's like, okay. But I said, anyway, why are you here? What do you want to talk about? And she started talking about an organization she wanted to start that was collecting audio stories about people, and then sharing those stories at their funeral. And that sounded great. And we talked about that. And then we talked about everything, spiritual practice and death and family in Vermont. We just went off for hours. We spoke. And all of a sudden at the end of it, I said, I know what it is. It's called Wake Up to Dying. It's a traveling exhibit that uses audio story about death and dying and life. And it goes from community to community. And I started to cry because I couldn't believe, I could see it. I could actually literally see what it was I was supposed to create. And it looked completely overwhelming to me. And I started to cry. My throat closed up and just tears running down my cheek. Not much more than that. But because I was like, oh shit, I have to do that. And of course, Erica looked at me like I had three heads again, but I think she got it in that moment that was a true thing. And very few, 3 months later, we gathered a board of directors. And
so she signed on at that point?
Yep. She did, right? She got it. She still thought I was crazy, but I think she saw it too. And the rest is history, as they say. We created the organization. We have over 100 audio stories exploring death, dying, and life from every possible angle. Even though the organization is closed, those are still up on the internet.
So where can people find them?
WakeUpDenyingProject.org.
Okay.
Another organization is going to be taking them on, but that link will still get you there.
So how was it received? Because you talked earlier about how people are resistant to the topic of death and avoidant of it. Mm-hmm. How was it received? Because you're putting it right out there.
This was in 2012, and everyone thought I was, I could not use the word dying in the title of the organization. I had to find another way to go. And I was adamant that the word dying be in there. And the first idea it was called Wake Up to Dying. Just wake up to dying. And then my offering to those naysayers about the word dying was to add the words, the project, the Wake Up to Dying Project. I'm like, does that soften it enough for all of you? It didn't, but I really didn't care. And I was determined. And I think it was tough. Funny thing that was occurring at the same time is that Act 39 in Vermont, the physician-assisted aid in dying, bill was going through the legislature. And I think people thought that's what I was promoting. And it wasn't what I was promoting. What I was promoting was the fact that we all die, right? This is a truth that we all have to pay attention to. It's true. And we need to spend time with it. And my whole proposition was, what would happen if we paid more attention to the fact that we die? What would happen? And that was it. That was my question. That was my stake in the ground. What would happen? And I didn't want to have the answer. I wanted people to come to it and decide for themselves. I didn't want to be prescriptive, right? I did not want to be prescriptive and actually I think that you can't be, because everybody responds to death and dying in their own way. Even though it's a universal truth, everything will die. We all filter that through our brains in individual ways. And so people didn't like it. However, there were some people who were like, yeah, thank you. Thank you for doing this.
You mean as you were trying to get the project off the ground? Okay.
Yeah. We had our first event in Hardwick. We didn't tell anyone we're coming. We put up a tent and we put up a sign that said the Wake Up Denying Project. And we started playing audio stories. We had like a half an hour mix right there. Or maybe it was even like 20 minutes.
The audio stories, who'd you get them from?
So Erica Heilman is a fantastic podcast person, story producer. And she became our audio story producer. And she interviewed people who were dying, people who worked in the trades, hospice people, chaplains, nurses and doctors. We interviewed people who had lost somebody, young people through very, very old, like from, I think the youngest person we got was probably 18 to 90.
So
something.
People who worked around death.
But who were dying.
Or people who were dying. That's what I was wondering.
And caregivers.
Okay.
And all sorts of people, all sorts of ages, all sorts of voices. And we pulled those interviews into 1 to 2, 3 minute clips, little story edits. And we wove those together into an audio loop that lasted 20 minutes. In the beginning, by the end, it was a 2-hour loop. It was pretty incredible.
Wow.
But all those individual stories are up on the website.
How was it received?
Well, in Hardwick, 25 people showed up. And people got to the door of the tent, saw the sign in the back that said "Wake Up Denying," and turned on their heels and left. Most of them, like, whoa! It's like this force field keeping people out. Like, it kind of freaked them out. But by the time we did it, the next time we did it in Montpelier, and about 500 people came. Actually,
that's quite a jump.
Yeah, huge. But we advertised. We were there 4 days. We had we had a bunch of events and panel discussions with local hospice doctors, spiritual leaders, all sorts of different things for different people. And so and we were there 4 days. So it was a big jump. People either loved it or hated it. That was the initial response. They thought it was too confronting and, disrespectful, or they were like, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Huh.
And then we did many events and it became thousands of people that would go through. And the people who liked it the most were 55 to 65-year-old women.
Really?
Yeah. That was it. They, I think they are those caregivers that they're the people who revolutionized how we die or were born, and they're going to help revolutionize the way we're dying. I think they are leading in this movement. Now this is a movement, right? This is now called the death positive movement. 2012, when I started, there was nothing around, but now it's happening everywhere. And I think that's fantastic. So the tide is shifting. Anyway, 55 to 65-year-old women liked it. And the millennials liked our event because of the audio story tent and the interactive chalkboard and some of the other art type things that were present. So ways to engage. I remember one guy said to me, he's like, are you getting a lot of backlash for doing this? And I said, yes. He's like, okay, that's great. So I think people that are change makers and younger people who haven't been given too much baggage around death, are really getting that we need to do this. Yeah, I think people liked it. And to talk about the movement now, I think a lot of people are jumping on. I think it's still women in that age range, primarily women, maybe of all ages now. But there's the movement to be death doulas and to do home funeral and to, they're more spiritual caregivers showing up of different stripes. And I think it's a big movement, the baby boomers.
Yep. So what happened to the project? Why did it only have a 5-year lifespan?
Yeah, 6 from door to door, I think. Birth to death. Well, it takes a lot of money to run a nonprofit with enough staff. So I think I got into that typical spot where I didn't have enough money to get enough help, to get enough money to get enough help. So we started to slow down, because I was doing most of the work and that was too much. But at the same time, this huge movement was taking off. Like I said, when I started, there was nothing.
Right.
There was nobody doing anything. The Death Cafe had started in England about 6 months before I started. The Conversation Project had probably just started, if not, I mean, almost simultaneously, I think. And there's no one doing big community-based events that you could explore death and dying and life through. But by the time I started wrapping it up, we had done 6 events. They were popping up. These events were popping up all over. Some of them I could tell had visited our site. It was almost uncanny how similar they were. But they were popping up in London and Sydney and San Francisco with big money and big backing in big cities, big populations. And so it just, like I said, it just took off.
Isn't it wild how an idea can kind of emerge from the sort of the collective consciousness?
Yeah, I think that's
and show up.
Yeah, I don't think I started
100th monkey idea.
I think I was one of those monkeys.
Yeah.
I don't think I started it, but I definitely was part of those
monkeys.
We are.
Yeah. In general, we are monkeys.
Yeah, we are.
Apes. Yeah.
That I agree with. But yeah, how fabulous, because I think we need it. We need to stop avoiding and start accepting the truth of our mortality. I think there's a danger a little bit in what's happening now in this movement, because I think, like anything, when I was doing it and people like me were doing it, it was very deep and community based, and it required you to go into it. You could wade in, but there was deep water that you could go into through our event. And I think now when we're talking about 7-day events in San Francisco with 300 people showing you stuff,
it's a little diluted.
It's a little diluted. I think I respect them. And I think some of the people there are willing to go into the muck, but there's a bit of a commodification, I think, in my humble opinion, of what's happening there. It can be, we can avoid feeling afraid and really examining something that scares the shit out of us.
Is that what you think might be happening?
I think so.
Yeah.
We can avoid it by creating an experience around it. And if somebody is doing events around the country, yeah,
like at the carnival.
Yeah, it felt, I definitely looked like a carnival, but there, you could wade in or you could go really deep. And that's probably the same with these events in San Francisco, but because they're now popping up all over, it's kind of like, oh yeah, I did the San Francisco death event. I did the New York death event. I'm thinking of catching London next year,
Really? Like a Deadhead show type
or
thing?
Like Burning Man.
I was just going to say Burning Man. It's like the Burning Man of dying.
Yeah. Again, I don't take anything away from people who are finding, I think they're broadcasting seeds. And I think that was always the important thing,
That's what I was thinking. Addressing death in any way is probably not a bad thing. Or you want to swim in the deep end.
Yeah.
So I can feel that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I don't take away, I thought that's what we were doing too at Wake Up to Dying. We were broadcasting seeds, That's why we were there for 4 days, to normalize it somehow. And just maybe if I touch you here with this idea and then you hear something over there and then you heard one of our PSA announcements on the radio, you would, 16 hits, maybe you'd be like, oh, wait, I might need to think about the fact that I'm dying. Anyway, so these big events, I think if they are serving that same purpose, that's good. But I think it's too easy to bypass, like a spiritual bypass, to think you understand it and you never went into it.
So to stay on the surface.
Yeah. Isn't that a word, like spiritual bypassing? It's kind of like, oh, I know what enlightenment is, or I know, and I can talk a good game because I've read a lot of books, but if you haven't gone into it, you aren't there.
I'm with you. That's one of the things I love about shamanism is that it's all about going into the shadow, into the darkness, and exploring the things that you don't want to explore.
Yeah.
What I found over the years when I've encountered some spiritual folks and some spiritual traditions is that they focus on just the positive, the light side of things, the love and the bubble gum, and they really have an aversion to talking about the darker stuff. But to me, we have all of it within us.
Yeah.
So why would you not want to make friends with that part of you?
Or how does that not serve you? And I think when we're talking about it in death and dying, things can move very quickly at the end of life, right? You're in a hospital setting, something's happened. Doctors start throwing fixes at you. You get onto this medical train and you cannot slow it down. And if you are somebody who hasn't thought about the fact that you're going to die and you haven't let that really seep in and to allow it to change the way you live and also the way you want to die, you're off on the train.
So what do you think it might look like if you were to, a medical process might look like if you were to consider that, wow, I'm actually dying here, or I could be?
I think we would get less treatments.
Yeah.
I think we'd be more willing to not take the word of a doctor as the holy word, the authority. I think we would think more about when to move that needle from quantity of life to quality of life. Like if we as a culture, right, this is a cultural issue. We as a culture, now we think we should get every single treatment there is, and we're battling cancer and we're doing all of this. We are doing everything we can. The doctor's unwilling to tell us, because they are human too, and probably haven't examined their own mortality. They're not willing to tell us that this is not curable. We can give you more months, but it's not necessarily the best quality months, but I am happy to do that for you. Instead of saying, you could have you're dying. This is it. We can't do anything more. This is it. How can I help you achieve your goals for this last month or two of your life? What can I do to help you?
It's very honest.
Yeah.
It reminds me of when my mom was dying and how she was holding on to life with white knuckles. Mm-hmm. She really avoided the topic at all costs. And she even bought her oncologist artwork. I remember her buying really expensive artwork because I think she was trying to get extra better care.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
She was thinking like
bargaining.
Yeah.
That's one of those.
Oh yeah. That's
bargaining.
That's
bargaining.
what she was doing. But her dying process was not pleasant. It was really painful to witness and to watch. And none of us really, we knew it was probably happening, but nobody ever talked to us as a family and said, she's end stage.
This is it. Yeah.
Nobody ever said those words. Nobody ever said that you need to prepare or have conversations.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was, we talked around it.
Mm-hmm. Doctors aren't good at giving you prognosis. They overestimate all the time because they have hope, just like we do. They don't want to rain on your hope, but they need, just like we do, to understand that hope is much broader than living or dying, I think. But we can't think about that when we're under the gun, when the emotions are racing, when fear is right there, when we're about to lose our life or about to lose somebody that we love. We can't slow it down unless we have practice thinking about it earlier. And that's why things like this death positive movement are so important. They help us think about it before we're in the boiling pot of water, right? Before we are under the gun. And I think that will change things. For example, my dad, I didn't give him his picture while he was alive. That is a regret of mine, right? How dumb was that? All I had to do was put a picture in an envelope and stick a stamp on it.
Do you think there was something deeper going on there? Why you didn't?
Maybe.
Send him the picture?
Just busy with life, which I think is what happens to all of us. And also I was like, oh wait, I should send him like some maple syrup and I should get a better picture and I'm going to get a nice frame. Like I just added stuff to it that I thought, and I should write a note, and I added all this stuff. Yeah. And then what I thought to myself was, damn it, I should have put a freaking picture in an envelope and put a stamp on it. When I went to clean out his apartment, by the way, he had this lazy boy chair and he would do his like crossword puzzle in it. And that's just where he lived his life. And there was a picture of my brother's dog right there. I know. Yeah. My heart was definitely just up into my throat. at that moment. It was a missed opportunity. Yeah. So I regret that. So, but we would die with less regret is my point. I actually see where my point was. I'm going back to it. Yay for me. Yeah. The point being, if we lightly hold the truth of our mortality as we are going through our life, I think we will make different decisions. And I think we will regret less. I mean, my wife tells me since I started the Wake Up Denying Project, I'm a much better person. I'm much easier to live with. I'm much more loving. And I think that is so true. It's really true. We do not go to bed angry anymore. And we didn't do that a lot before, but we could, go away angry in the morning. It's just not in our makeup at all anymore because life is way, way, way too short to spend any energy like that. I don't want to waste any time. I stopped drinking. I wasn't a big drinker. It's part of my Buddhist practice to not take intoxicants, but one of the reasons it was so easy for me to give up wine, which I love, was because I felt like it was wasting my time. It felt like a waste of time. And I didn't want to waste any time. I wanted to be clear and present and loving and experience life completely and fully. And I don't judge people who think wine helps them experience life fully. I think that was just fine.
The way you wanted to go
just
about it.
Just the way I want to go about it. So no judgment, just
no regrets.
A recognition that I want to be completely present day in and day out because I know how short life is. And I think my life is richer and more loving and creative and amazing because of that knowledge that we'll die. I forgive. I ask for forgiveness. I don't put things off as much. And I say no to stuff. And that was one of the things that I was really amazed about, the way Wake Up Denying was affecting people. People knew me in town and they would come up to me and say, hey, I just quit my job. I'm like, oh. She's like, because of Wake Up Denying.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm like, really? That's amazing. Well, do you have another job? No. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, maybe some planning would have been helpful. I don't recommend.
But that powerful concept of life is too short.
Yeah, I'm not going to do what I don't want to be doing anymore.
Don't waste your time. That's one of the most powerful gifts my mom gave me, besides birth, was when she was dying, you could just see the regret that she had, and my mom and daughter relationships are complicated.
Yes.
And some of the stuff she gave voice to, some of the regrets she gave voice to, like she wanted to do different things with her life. She wanted to be a surgeon. She wanted to race cars. And then simple things. She wanted to have sex with David Bowie.
Oh, simple things.
Yeah. And yeah.
Did she know David?
No. She lived in a fantasy world.
Yeah. That's right.
She wanted to drive a convertible up the Pacific Coast Highway. Those kinds of regrets she gave voice to.
And she could have done some of those things.
But they gave her a time limit, and she was young, and she wasn't able to do those things. But there were a lot of regrets that were under the surface that she never gave voice to. And so I could feel them when I would walk in the room. Yeah. They were thick and painful. Yeah. And I think that's a lot of the reason why she was hanging on to life with white knuckles, because she wanted that second chance, or she just was riddled with regret. So I saw that and I took that to heart, and I promised myself from that time on that I would never not do something. I didn't, if I had the luxury of a deathbed, that I didn't want to be spending my time thinking about the what ifs. What if I had tried this? What if I had done that? What if?
Yeah, right. And that's one of the gifts of being around people who are dying, and to be able to walk into that room. And a lot of people can't, so they miss that opportunity. It's also a really nice thing about the death movement, because you had an experience, I would call that a wake up to dying moment. Like, oh, wait, I'm going to die. What do I want to do about that? And it actually could actively influence your life at that time. But it's like a New Year's resolution for people. We start it for a little while and then we forget and we fall into our life. So one of the things I'm really excited about with this death positive movement is that we are seeing it everywhere and we can't escape it. No matter how, shallow or deep those offerings are, They're there and they are going to remind us. And we can, it's up to us to decide what to do with that awakening, that information. Yeah. But your mom, was young.
Yeah. She was 43 when she was diagnosed and 45 when she died.
Yeah. That's young.
Yeah. She's really young.
And that's important for people to know. We really don't know when.
Yep.
We know we're going to die. There's no promise about when. We think in this culture it's going to be old, and it very frequently isn't.
Well, it's wishful thinking. Yeah.
So,
or we'll have a post call. Or what I find too is that there's a lot of time spent trying to prevent the inevitable. That staying young, staying as youthful as possible.
Billions and billions and billions.
It's a big industry. Yeah.
No, our value is in being young and vital and accomplishing things and collecting things. And that's another thing I realized with my own waking up to dying, that I don't put value on those things as much. I'm happy to have a roof. I'm super beyond happy. I'm grateful for roof and food and income and a partner. I'm very, very, very lucky in all those fronts. But my value doesn't get judged by the number of things I've accomplished or necessarily by my looks or any of those things. And I think that's because I think a lot about death and dying and just go back to the life is precious and short, and I don't want to be distracted. I want to do the things that are true and real and deep and to me are what life is really about.
Sounds like a good way to live.
I'm happier. Yeah, for sure. So much happier. And my relationship is so much better. And
it's really honest. I mean, really what we're talking about is honesty. Mm-hmm. Just being honest about the inevitability of death, which can help you be more honest about how do you want to live your life.
Yeah.
And what's important to you.
Yeah.
And why not put that up front instead of putting a lot of energy into avoidance? Because it takes a lot of energy to avoid shit.
Yes, it does. Yeah. And less to just sit in it, as uncomfortable as it is. But we need to take baby steps. We haven't been trained. In this culture.
Everybody's at different places, and it's that's why I want to talk about this because it's a place to start, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think it can't be. I mean, it can be avoided now, even though it's everywhere right now. It can be avoided by commodifying it or making it an experience and not taking the opportunity that's given to dive into it. And wade. I'll say wade into it.
Dip your toe in.
Great way to start, advanced directives.
Yep.
Do your advanced directive. And you don't even have to do a full out advanced directive. You can just identify who your person is. And now I'm doing a little pitch for my work. I am the community education outreach coordinator for Vermont Ethics Network, and we are the people who have done advanced care planning forums and are educating people about that.
Brilliant.
Around the state. So to me, it's way upstream. People confuse advanced directives and think they are right. They're about people who are dying, but they're not. It's way, way, way upstream from that. And to me, getting an 18-year-old to do their advanced directive, at least just name their person, is really important work. And I think it's cultural change work. And that's what I really want to do. I want to normalize the fact that we die and start with an 18-year-old naming their agent, if that makes any sense. To normalize it and to let these younger people lead us and let them be less afraid and just let a big group of people go to their end, their death as they will, but let's change the culture with younger people.
It's brilliant and important.
Yeah.
What I'm curious about, as we've been having this conversation, I was going to ask you how this has changed you, and you talked a lot about how it's changed you, but I was wondering about spiritual life. Were you a spiritual person when you were faced with your dad's death?
No. Not so much then. I started doing Zen when I was in my 20s, Zen Buddhist training, and I left it. And I only got back to it about 5.5 years ago. So now during my dad's death and that experience, it wasn't until later I I started meditating again about, I'd say 6 years ago, intensely on my own, about an hour a day, deep, deep practice. And that was really starting to move me again. It was starting to wake me up a little bit to what's my true nature, and, or at least reminding me that that was something I wanted to know. And in the middle of that, as that was ripening and really getting going, this man called me who I used to work with. I did project development with him, and he called me and told me he was on hospice. And he said, "You are the best project manager I know. And I just learned you're a hospice volunteer. And can you come see me?" And when I got there, he asked me if I would project manage his death for him.
Wow.
Yeah, that's what I said. And I kind of looked at him like, you're looking at me like, whoa. And I said I would. And he said, "Well, how are you going to do that?" And so it was an interview. I had no idea it was an interview, but it was. And we talked about the systems I would use and how that would look and how that could be of benefit. And he said to me, the biggest thing is I am a very passionate person about relationships, and everyone in this community wants to come see me and say goodbye and wants to help. And my wife, who was new to him, relatively new, and was an introvert, or is an introvert. And she didn't want everybody coming. She was pissed he was dying. I don't blame her for 1 second. That's, they had just found each other.
Yeah, that's sad. Yeah.
Very sad. And she was angry, and she didn't want to waste any time with all these people around. And he said to me, "Do you think you can balance both our needs?" I said, "I think I can." And that was the job. That was the job, to balance everybody's needs. And I managed like 26 different volunteers and various things. So anyway, the point is, I did all of that on my newly rediscovered Zen practice. And when Zen and death connected, it was like a technicolor world open for me. I was blown away by the experience of those two things crossing. Because to me, what it showed me was the universe opened up and said, everything you need to know is right here, right at the moment of dying, or in the process of dying, is what I thought. And I vowed, like, I have to, this is it. This is the path. I don't know what it is. And I Googled Zen and death, and up popped this organization in New York called the Zen Center for Contemplative Care. And they had a 1-year training program that was called Foundations in Contemplative Caregiving. It was sort of an on-ramp for Buddhist chaplains. And they were holding an event in like 3 weeks in Garrison.
Interesting timing.
Interesting timing. And I signed up for the event. I went. I walked into a room of 60 people, and I was like, these are my people. They were all talking about death and dying. They were practitioners of one kind or another. I was like, wow, there's a whole group of these people. And in between the time I signed up for it and the time that I went to Garrison, the WakeUpDenying Project was born. Right in those 3 weeks, that was when I met with Erica. And it was like the world was on fire for me. I was deeply in the flow. Nothing was stopping. Everything was falling into place and moving very quickly. And then I found my teacher a couple months later in the Zen Center. And it was like when Zen and death connected, everything fell into place and started moving. So that's pretty cool.
Oh, it's awesome.
Yeah.
So after doing all of this work around death and focusing on death, where do you sit with
Death?
With death, yeah.
As we age, I think, and as it goes, the more I learn, the less I know, right? I don't know. I can tell you that I'm not afraid of it, but am I?
I know. It's like, theoretically.
Yeah. Theoretically,
say,
I'm not afraid.
Yeah.
Theoretically, I think I'm practicing my practice. I'm a serious Zen practitioner. I practice a lot. I go on a lot of retreats. It is who and what I am doing now in the world. And it holds me and it shows me what, I'm starting to get a sense of what's true and maybe what's not true. and I don't know enough to actually tell you what's true and what's not true. But
well, if you were
able to explain
able to, I would understand that it would be your truth.
Yeah, right. Okay. We are more than this body, is what I've come to see. We are something expansive, and we are the absolute. We are also this form. I think we are both things at the same time. We are form and emptiness, as the Buddhists would say, form and emptiness, form and emptiness. And so if it's like the ocean, we're the ocean and we are the waves, right? We are a wave and we all come from the ocean. If the wave goes, it's that quick, our life. We're up, we're down. We're out of consciousness, the ocean being representing consciousness or the absolute. We're out of it and we're back into it. And that's how I think of death. And in that case, I actually don't know that we die, right? What dies?
Good question.
Yeah.
Well, did you have a direct experience that led you to that particular truth?
I think Zen just sort of works on you like your compost.
Ah, that's a
I think
lovely
you cook,
image. Yeah.
You cook and you cook and you cook and you cook and you
smell really bad.
You ripen.
And then you become something beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think over time of my short life as a practitioner, there has been a breaking down of what I thought was me, meaning this ego construct, this form, this set of habits. And you start to see a separation from that. You start to see that that is not actually who you are or what you are. You don't know exactly what it is, but you start to see what it's not. And I think that's a really nice process. Sort of this tiny layer by tiny layer of letting go of who and what you think you are rather than finding what you are. You know what I mean?
Uh-huh.
It's more of a process of elimination than accumulation.
No, I think I understand what you're saying. Yeah.
And that's been my experience.
Okay. It's hard to put this shit into words. I understand that. Yeah.
Yeah. But then what are you? But yes, I had a tiny, tiny, tiny experience. And I would say it's like looking at a black curtain that I think is my world. And then all of a sudden there's a pinprick in it and there happens to be some light behind it. And then I was like, oh shit.
Yeah.
There's something back there.
Yeah.
What is that? So I think that's the level of experience I had, a pinprick and a black curtain. But practice of any spiritual kind, I think what it does, I believe there is something back there now. Mm-hmm. And I want to know more. So I work to find that. I practice. At the same time, you're not allowed to grasp, right? You can't be like seeking. So it's this weird sort of conundrum of being completely present in what is now, because that's really
part
all
of your
there
Zen
is.
practice, you mean, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's really all there is. Yet,
is there
knowing
more?
There's something and wanting to know that and having faith and doubt and great determination that you can get there and understand it. So, and then the idea is that you're looking, that pinprick with practice over time gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and the hole gets bigger and bigger and bigger until eventually the bottom half of that curtain just falls off. And that's, I think, a crude description of the awakening process.
I like it.
Yeah. So
in your experience, have you, working with people and talking with people, have you found that it's important for people to have a spiritual life or not? Or does it not matter?
I think it's like that old saying, there's no atheist in a foxhole. I think people are seeking something at the end of life. I mean, they want to have, I think that helps reduce fear. That has been my experience.
Yeah.
People who have some sort of belief, and I don't care what the belief is, you're going to heaven, absolutely nothing's going to happen, or you're going to become part of the universe. I don't care what the belief is, but having a belief in something is helpful. And having thought about it before you are at death's door is helpful. I guess that's what I would say. But you can have spirituality, anything. I'm reminded of one of our audio stories for Wake Up or Dying, where this chaplain, a brand new chaplain, is working with an 18-year-old boy who will absolutely not acknowledge the fact that he's dying. And he is dying. He is right there at the end. And she is trying to talk to him. And all he wants to do is talk about basketball. That's it. Just talk about basketball. And she goes back over a couple of days and she's like, she feels compelled that he has to acknowledge the fact that he's dying and talk about it. And she finally, fed up, goes and talks to her supervisor and says, this guy's dying. He's 18. I feel like he needs to talk about that. All he wants to do is talk about basketball. And her supervisor, her chaplain supervisor, said to her, where do you think an 18-year-old boy's spiritual center lies? Basketball.
Talk about basketball.
To talk about basketball. Yeah. She goes back and he has died. She didn't get to talk to him again after getting that insight, that aha moment from her supervisor. Of course, that's where a spiritual center is. So I think when we're working with people who are dying, finding out whatever their spiritual center is, that's their spiritual center.
Yeah, I like
and there's
that.
Some value in there. There's some reason. And if you can tease apart what holds them in that, you will help them die in a more peaceful way, I believe.
I'd like to believe that too. Yeah.
Yeah.
We have interesting conversations at my house, my husband and I.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Yeah. I've had all these unusual visionary experiences, and because of my direct experiences, have come to have certain beliefs around what I think happens when you die. And I like to say to him, I'm like 98% sure that our consciousness will carry on after we physically die. And he's the opposite. He hasn't had these kinds of direct experiences. Right. So he says, I'm 98% sure that nothing happens, but he goes, but I'm open to the idea that there's something there. We're both atheists in that we don't subscribe to any religions or anything like that. But it's interesting that we have these different takes based on my direct experience versus his not having direct experience. And he won't, because he's a super honest guy, the way he looks at it. He won't subscribe to, just because I've had these experiences, he won't say, well, I'm going to jump on board with that because you've had them, which is how I think it should work. I'd rather he had his own direct experiences.
That's very Buddhist. The Buddha's like, no, don't believe me. You have to experience it.
Yeah, well, that's
so go find out.
Yeah, you can't read this shit in a book, right?
No. But how do you feel about the fact that he thinks nothing happens? Do you worry for him?
No.
Yeah.
Because my direct experience
will take care of that for him.
Well,
I believe.
Because I've had so many death-related. My first spontaneous visionary experiences were all, the first three of them were all death-related, where I went through a death experience. And then one of the most profound, seriously profound experiences I had in my advanced shamanic training, or no, it wasn't even in my advanced shamanic training, it was my earlier training, where I went to this place in the upper realms. I'm talking through the filter of shamanism now, through basically the place you go to when you die.
Yeah.
And went to the Hall of Records.
Wow.
And asked to see my life book. So, shamanism's all symbolic, and it's the dreaming. It's the dreaming. So I am escorted to this room and I'm given this book, and it was laid on this. Keep in mind, it's all, this is the story that how I perceived it, how it was filtering through my consciousness. There's this heavy wooden table in the front of this room, and these shelves, floor to ceiling shelves way back in this room. And they're filled with these immense tomes, and mine is brought to this table and it's closed, and it's like a leather cover, and there's etchings on the cover. I knew that the etchings, it was almost like a Celtic knot looking etchings. Cool. And I knew that they were telling a bigger story, but I didn't explore what that meant. But what caught my attention was there was a red ribbon caught in a page of this book. And so of course I wanted to open it up to that page. And so when I opened the book up, there was an image on the page of me looking at my life book.
Oh, wow. Infinite.
Yeah, it was this infinite picture. Yeah. Just me looking at my life book, me looking at my life book, me looking at my life book.
Crazy.
And then the image popped off the page and became this sort of hologram. And I thought, oh, this is cool.
Yeah.
And so I thought, what if I flip back some pages? So I put back some pages, and I was at the scene of my first wedding, my least successful marriage, my least favorite.
You were
one.
a beginner then.
Yeah, well, whatever. It's kind of an idiot, but I'm seeing the image of my dad's backyard where the wedding took place. It's in Tucson. There's a yard surrounded by a adobe wall. There's a pool. There's people sitting. I had this aerial view of it. See the palm trees, and then me and this guy I was getting married to next to the guy I referred to as Reverend Cheese, and then this small group of family members and some friends witnessing this. And the image again popped off the page, and I realized that if I focused on one person, that I became that person.
Ah, wow.
And then I realized that I was able to experience what it was like to be on the receiving end of me from any person.
What a gift.
Holy shit.
I mean, it's a gift.
Yeah.
It may not be pleasant.
No. And I felt the true, like I was perceiving from my future sister-in-law how truly happy she was in that moment to have me be a part of the family and the event and all of that. And then the Wendy who was witnessing this and having this experience was like, oh crap, knowing that 7 months down the road, I was going to be
not happy.
Yeah, I was going to be exiting the marriage, and that I was going to have to deal with that, the impact that had on. But just that idea that a life review is not, there's no one there judging you.
It's just you experiencing you
from the perspective of everyone you encountered.
Yeah. That's fascinating.
And so to take that back to my life, my everyday life, that probably has been the most profound experience.
That's amazing. That's amazing. That's a true gift. And that life review thing comes up in a lot of different spiritual practices, I think.
It does.
If you can think about the fact that you're going to die way before the end, you're forced into some life review. I think it's quite possible a symptom or a result of examining the truth of your mortality before you need to. You'll start to look at your life differently.
You mean when you get the...
Now. No, now. If you think about the fact that you're going to die,
you can't help but...
You'll start to look at the way you're living, right? And that's sort of a life review. And again, the earlier, the better.
I know.
And, some people are terrified of the topic, and I don't quite know how to help them except to encourage them to very, very, very slowly take sips of it and explore it, and maybe get some help from some professionals who might be able to help them with that.
That's a great suggestion.
Yeah. Or practice meditation, or go see a shaman. But I was doing a dissolution of the body meditation for a group of people this weekend. I was walking a group of like 25 people through the Tibetan sort of understanding of how the 5 elements break down. And one of the things that what I'm reminded of from what you just said is that the Tibetans believe that once you die, you go through a bardo. And this is a time, do you know about this? Because I'm very tiny.
I know probably a little bit less than you do.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Darn, the blind leading the blind here.
Yeah.
But anyway, there's this bardo passage, and you want to train for this bardo passage so that you can wake up, deal with the consequences of your karma, and wake up and permanently be enlightened, right? I think. Forgive me, Tibetans, if I've misspoken. But one of the things in this dissolution meditation it says is that you are going to experience basically your behavior in a way. If you lived in a certain way, you're going to have bliss and happiness. But if you have mistreated people and you have done things that are bad and wrong and maybe not forgivable, you will experience demons during this bardo process. So it is a life review of it's similar to what you're talking about. Like your own experiences take form your own ego takes shape as demons and reflects back to you how you were as a person.
I was just going to say that is very shamanic. The concept of demons is basically shadow stuff, and it's coming from within you.
Yes.
Not that they're actual demons.
No, but it's a life review. So the Tibetans are saying after your body dies, you go through this bardo where that life review happens. It's like, getting to the pearly gates and having, is it God or is it Peter? I don't know who's sitting at the gate. Forgive me. I don't know. And they're going to decide whether or not you can come in based on your behavior. Right. So it's interesting that that's a theme, that there's this life review, but why are we waiting till we're dead? Well, that's like a cop out. It's like, actually try to live that now. Try to live like the Buddha say, live the precepts,
I vote for that.
I vote for that too. I think, gosh, this reminds me of a whole other topic that will be great to bring up. Not a different topic, different angle. But yeah, I think it's super important for us to be doing it now. Hold the truth of the fact that you die. I'm going to say this 10 times, 30 times during this interview. And it can, if you allow it, to shift your life, and it will shift the way you look at people. If you really know this person sitting across from you is going to die and has a limited time on this earth, there's no need to be mean to them or critical of them. I mean, don't you want to help them just have a decent experience here on earth?
Yeah, we're all just kind of fumbling through.
Yeah.
Trying to get by.
Yeah. It's yet another thing I think I have developed from practice. A lot of this comes from my practice, but my practice is about knowing that you're going to die.
Mm-hmm.
My teacher talks about that topic all the time. It's like, do not forget, wake up, take heed, do not squander your life, right? That is Zen 101. So a lot of this comes from that, but obviously I've been thinking about death and dying a lot since I started all these projects.
It doesn't show.
No? It doesn't show that I think about it?
Yeah. Oh, good. I'm just being a smart ass.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But compassion, that's the point. Compassion is another thing that comes through practice, but also for really understanding that we're all going to die. And I think it's a very, very, it's a nicer way to live. But what I wanted to say, have you ever heard of terror management theory?
Yes, I'm a big fan of terror management theory.
Okay.
In fact, I got to take the class with one of the creators of it.
Really?
Yep.
Well, one of those creators actually wanted to hook up with WakeUpDenying to do some research.
I love the theory. I became really enthralled. It was a social psychology class.
Tell us what it is. You can tell us.
Well, my understanding of terror management theory, but I'm going to dust it off my little tiny brain, is that because death is the only thing that we know is certain, that we have to manage that information. The knowledge of that is omnipresent. It's always there.
Conscious or not.
Yeah. Typically we're pushing it down into our unconscious, but it can create a sense of terror. And so we are trying to manage that terror, whether we're consciously doing it or unconsciously doing it. And my understanding from a social psychology standpoint is that each, we'll say, culture comes up with their own way of understanding or managing that terror, and they create belief systems around that. And religion is a great example of a belief system that can help people understand and manage the terror.
Yes.
And
even if that religion is called the Patriots, right? Some sort of tribal
You're talking about the New England?
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry.
All right.
Yes, the New England Patriot.
Little regional.
Yeah, right. So, yeah, we want to bolster our security by joining things, by being a part of something.
Exactly. So
religion, patriotism, or the New England Patriots.
Yes, something to feel you're connected or unified with these other people. We're all together in this, and
what happens with that is we create other. We create somebody outside of us.
And that's what I was just about to get to, is then let's say your culture bumps up against a different culture. Culture A bumps up against culture B. They have a whole different set of beliefs about how to manage their terror.
Right.
And who's correct. Whose beliefs are right, and that's when
violence
ensues, and
and we can hurt somebody that is not us. And so all of that comes from repressing our fear around death and dying. It's about repressing it. And when they wanted to work with, when they talked about working with Wake Up to Dying on a project, it was the sort of the opposite of that. It was like, well, what if we shed light on this truth and hold it lightly and walk through our life with it? And will that change the way we treat other people? And there have been some studies. They did a study, those guys. I don't remember their name. Forgive me for calling them those guys. But they did a study for the National Cancer Society and said if people understood that they were going to die and they were reminded of that from time to time, would they take better care of themselves? And the experiment was with sunblock. And people use sunblock more. When they knew they more aware of their mortality, they were more willing to take care of themselves. So when it's repressed, we create other and we have violence. When we hold it lightly and know it, we have more awareness and we take better care of ourselves. And I would say, and we treat each other better because we know we're not, we're suffering the same fate.
Makes perfect sense.
To me too.
Yeah.
To me too. So that was, again, behind the Wake Up to Dying project, that idea that if we just held it lightly, we could change the way we live and, shift the culture and be kinder and more loving. Just a little aspiration, just a goal.
A small thing. Yeah.
Just a little goal.
Well, I guess, we don't need much of that right now on planet Earth.
Holy tamale.
Yeah.
We're doing patriotism. Like the president calling for patriotism is that. It's like circle the wagons, protect us. Yep. There is other.
The wall.
Yeah. And that's the other thing. If you, as a Zen practitioner, you start to see there is no other. There isn't. We are not separate. We are all that ocean. We might be individual waves, but we are all the ocean. And you just can't bring yourself to hurt other. I mean, you can because we slip back into our ego construct and our bad habits and we get less mindful throughout our day and we do stupid things. And, but the more aware we are and the more we practice and we try to be present, the less I think of that we do. And so again, we're Zen and death cross.
Yep.
We reinforce each other.
From my experience, I would say the way I describe it when I'm in this other place, from this looking at life from this other perspective, is that there's nothing human about that place.
Yeah.
There's no beliefs, there's no skin, there's no gender, there's nothing human about that place.
And that place is, and maybe my word's the absolute.
Well, to me, it's pure consciousness.
Pure consciousness. I would say that is the same.
Yeah. It's just.
Yeah. No gender, no life, no death.
No, there's nothing human about it, which is a really weird thing to try to wrap your head around. Yeah. Because you're wrapping your head around it and your head is human.
Right. Right. The small mind can't understand it. The big I, the, true self can understand it. I think, again, I'm a beginner.
Yeah, we don't. Yeah.
I'm a beginner.
I also will throw in the caveat right now that please take everything I say with a grain of salt.
Me too.
Yeah.
Me too.
Which is what I wanted to originally call this podcast, Grain of Salt.
Good.
But it was taken, so.
So some other, just some fun. Now we're getting kind of down in there, which is fun. And so one of the things that was really special to me about the Wake Up to Dying project and the way we created that event, what we did is we created this courtyard and that people could enter into. It was like you'd be walking down a sidewalk and in the grassy area outside of the library were these tents and this chalkboard and these people milling about. And if who was supposed to be there was there. It's sort of one of those things, right? We created a space. We held it open. It was almost like an altar, in my opinion, an altar that when you were ready for the lesson, you could enter in and it was up to you. But the people who entered in, it was magical. And I don't even want to say magical. It was otherworldly. It was beyond my understanding. But people would enter in and there would be people standing next to each other who had identical experiences, who needed to talk about it, who were complete strangers, but ended up standing next to each other and both saying similar stories. My mom committed suicide and I've never told anybody that before. And somebody would say this. And then I'd be like, oh, That person just told me the exact same story. You two should talk. And it was like this,
Really?
no kidding. It gets even stranger. We were in the tent, and there was a woman who was there who was looking at, do you have anything on suicide? It was another suicide thing, which is interesting, I guess. She said, my son, OD'd. He was like 27 years old. It just happened in January and something like that. And this other woman in the tent spun around on her heels and said, my son just committed suicide. It was February, and his name was John, and she said his name was Jim. It was just in a 10 by 10 tent on a grassy area outside of the library. Like, so what's going on there? Another woman said to me, I didn't know you were here. This was in Boston. I just got locked out of my office. I've never been locked out of my office before. And I went to walk home to get my keys on a path I have never walked on before. And I see you here. And she said, I think it's my mom. I think it's my mom. My mom died, and I think she was sending me here. And I think she's the one that led me here. And I said, this is not an uncommon story for us. And because those things were happening there. So we created a space where
all these synchronous
guidance could happen from
events happened, beyond,
and people were being healed all at the same time. It was pretty magical.
Another powerful experience. Yeah. Thank you, death.
Yeah. Thank you, spirits of whatever stripe. You don't leave us behind. And I don't know what I feel about that, but,
You don't feel about what?
If there's, spirits helping us or not. What do you think?
Well, what I've come to is that and again, take everything I say with a grain of salt, but what I've come to is that there's a part of us that's extremely wise and loving and not human, that is kind of has this bird's eye perspective and understanding and probably wishes for our human selves, that's giving us opportunities a lot of times through synchronicities like you just described, to be able to have an experience that will stick,
that will be healing or stick.
Well, that
broader.
That or shift you in some way. And I think I certainly, I could spend probably 3 hours talking about those kinds of experiences I've had in my life.
Yeah.
So they seem pretty real. And
for sure.
So I think that there's a part of, it's a part of us though. And so that part of us, from the tradition I studied, you would say is dreaming you into existence, that higher consciousness, whatever you want to call it. So our higher consciousness is dreaming us into existence, and this is enabling our human selves to have these experiences, which,
for what purpose?
That's the big question, right?
Yeah. How do you, I heard an interesting description of this once, and it was like, consciousness wants to have, it's sort of like sending out a satellite. You're like a satellite to go have experience that it can pull back and integrate into its wholeness.
That's pretty similar to.
Is that your thought?
Yeah.
I thought that was a great way to visualize it. Like, oh, so Nina, this being, this body, this is real, and it is here to experience the world in a certain way, to have experiences. So the satellite concept is like, I am this Nina satellite, this being, this body satellite that is born to experience and to send like those signals back to the whole.
Right. That's very much in line with what my experiences have shown me, is that we have this higher self, for lack of a better description, this higher consciousness, also referred to as your oversoul, that I would say decides to have this experience as a human.
So dreams you
into existence for the purpose of evolution of the higher consciousness.
Fascinating.
Because that place is the opposite of this place. It's that place. It's not physical.
It's emptiness.
And or I don't know if it's emptiness or not.
Right.
But this place is very dense and physical, and we bump up against each other and experiences, and those experiences invite opportunities for growth. How am I going to be in response to you, Nina, right now in this conversation?
Right.
How am I going to be in response to all these other people I encounter in my life? How am I going to choose to be? And it's also deeply unconscious how we are bumping up against each other. But if you start paying attention, you start noticing patterns, and these patterns are really revealing. If you pay attention to those patterns, what are they trying to reveal about you and the direction that you need to go in as a human?
Yeah. What's the lesson to be learned? Yeah, that's cool.
And then that information, so the tradition I studied is the Hawaiian or Polynesian tradition. And they would say that when you're physically born, a piece of your oversoul, your higher self, or your higher consciousness separates from itself and plants itself in your heart when you take your first breath.
Wow.
And then
That's
it stays
cool.
with you. So that's who you really are, they would say. And that part stays with you throughout your life, and you have access to it at any time, but it's a practice to be able to access that part of you. And it stays with you until you take your final breath. And then it separates and reunites with itself. Yeah. But that's now cool. It's pregnant with all of the experiences you had through that lifetime. So it brings that back. Exactly.
So if that's true,
don't know.
If it's true, it's a different visual, I think, than what I believe, but it's the same kind of thing. Like we're the absolute and we're the relative. And when the form dies, we're the absolute again until we are, have a rebirth. Does that make you, or could that make one, do you think, less afraid of dying?
I think so.
Yeah.
I mean,
kind of a simple question.
Yeah. Yes. I mean,
obvious, but maybe not.
I think on different levels. I think if you're in that place, like if you're consciously dying, which is my hope for myself, that I'm going to go into that, if I have the luxury of a deathbed, that I'm going to go into that experience as conscious as possible.
Right. Me too.
That's my hope.
Me too.
But I also understand that there's a part of me that's probably going to be petrified.
Yep.
And
fighting, not done.
Yep.
Confused.
So, I'm expecting that I'll have both those experiences, and I'm hoping that I'll anchor myself more in the.
Yeah. Well, that's why we practice.
Yeah.
Those of us that have a practice that prepares us for death. That's why we practice, so that at the time of death, we can be more in that. And I've heard stories of like Buddhist priests saying to people when they wake up kind of confused, they become lucid for a moment. You're dying. Oh, right. Okay. Like just little tiny reminders. So I think it makes me think there's not death in a way. There is no death in a way. That's how I see it.
No, from that perspective, there really wouldn't be. There'd be physical death.
Right. Physical death.
But if that's the dreaming, then is that really real? Anyway.
Yeah. I don't know.
We don't know.
We don't know. But I think like you, it won't be all, cookies and cream into my death. I think I'd be afraid like other people, but I'm not afraid to die. I know that sounds like a contradiction. I am not afraid to die. I don't want to.
It seems a lot easier to die than it is to be born.
You think so?
I think so.
I think those end of life doulas that were also birth doulas they say it's pretty similar. It looks hard to die to me. Dying looks hard. It doesn't look super easy. It seemed like there's work happening in my experience.
Maybe I'm thinking about it from a spiritual standpoint.
Oh, okay.
Like the idea of having to
pick a life, or dream up a life.
From what I've shown or experienced, that happens before you're even conceived. Although there's no time there, so it's all happening simultaneously, which is kind of a fucked up idea.
Totally.
But going from that really expansive state to this really confined, dense space, and then through a birth canal, and then having to get used to the physicality of it, that's what I mean by difficult.
Gotcha.
Whereas the death is a release and you're free.
Right. Dropping the weight of the form. And I have definitely heard people who have had near-death experiences say that.
Yeah.
That losing the body is incredibly freeing, and then actually coming back into it is painful.
That's more in line with what I'm talking about.
I heard that several times from several different people.
Well, I think depending on your psyche, if that death can be a really difficult process if you're not, I guess,
ready. But even so, I mean, there are physical things that happen. I mean, if you believe the Tibetan perspective, it's like the body breaks down, and there's a, letting go of the form, the muscle, the bone. It's, it's a heaviness, and you feel like maybe your arms are falling off your shoulders and your legs are coming out of the hip joints.
So it's dismemberment.
It's a real letting go of that weight.
Wow.
And then there's
that doesn't sound like fun.
No. Fire or what's next? Water, I guess. And then there's fire, and just there's a deep thirst that happens. So there is a physical letting go.
So those parts are not fun.
Yeah. But I think you're pretty unconscious to it as a being, as a person. But that is happening, and you might wake up into different parts of that. That's a nice thing to know as a person who's working with somebody who's dying, that, this is sort of this is the earth element dissolving. This is
it's a nice way to frame
water element dissolving. And there's a lot online to look at to kind of come to understand that process. But it's a nice thing. It's a nice tool for somebody working with the dying to know it's okay. This is
part
normal.
of the process.
This is part of it. Thank you to the Tibetans who are like the scientists. And they like measure and chart and graph and define everything. And those high spiritual beings who have gone through the process so consciously and able to communicate it. Pretty cool.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So let me throw this one out. So what if, let's say everything we're saying from our experiences or studies or whatever is wrong, and that there is nothing afterwards? How would having that belief be helpful, I guess? Like what would you say to people who believe there's nothing?
The first thing that I thought of when you said that is I don't think there's anything wrong with that perspective at all.
Absolutely not.
Yeah. And I think what I thought was, I'd want them to know their legacy. That was the first reaction I had, was like, well, I'd want to hear their story. I'd want to hear their story of their life. I'd want to hear the stories of them from their loved ones, maybe even in their presence. I'm talking as somebody who helps people through the end of life. So I'd want to make sure that they knew there was a legacy left behind. And I guess I'm saying that in a way to comfort them, that if there is now nothing, they have left behind something of themselves, and they made a difference in the world. They left a mark. And maybe that's me projecting, me saying, gosh, if there is nothing, I would want to make sure at least there was something.
But I imagine anybody with that belief, who really, really, they hold on to that belief, would get to the same place.
Yeah.
I think legacy is important regardless of what you believe.
Yeah, I do too.
Otherwise, what's the fucking point?
Right.
Yeah.
Leave something. And I think that makes it easier for people to die if they felt they have done something. It definitely weighs more on men than women, in my experience of being around the dying. Men who have not felt like they accomplished what they needed to accomplish are having a harder time letting go of this life. So I say think about that earlier, and maybe adjust your values to, like, maybe you're not going to become the head of the company you want to become, but maybe the value is in time with family and stuff. But anyway, giving people who think it's done and end, I actually have seen those people have a harder time, to be honest. They're more afraid of dying in my experience.
I was curious about that.
Yeah. That's been my experience.
Okay.
And even just talking to people who have that belief I find less willing to talk about death and dying. But it's also very matter of fact. And it's, for these people, and when they're out from the actual truth of their death, it's just like, it's just nothing. It's ending. But as they get closer, I think I've seen it be more of a concern, which is why when I'm helping people, I move towards legacy at that time. Yeah.
It seems like a brilliant way to address that. Yeah, I like that a lot.
Yeah. And, we can talk about, how do you want to be buried? Do you think that maybe, we bury you full without green burial, then you can become part of the earth and the trees and is there some sort of biological thing you can buy into? that we burn you, you become part of the air, we sprinkle your ashes, you become part of the flowers. Like, can that help them? Is that something? But I also don't believe in like completely scripted religious understanding of death either. Like, it's like, I don't think it's that necessarily either.
Right.
So,
But if somebody's in that place,
it's their experience.
yeah.
I honor that. Yeah. You have to.
Yep. I was just
Why?
going to say you have to. Yeah.
They're about to die. This is the end of their life. Why would you argue with anybody?
Yeah, you don't want to start
point?
arm wrestling with somebody.
No, you're wrong. Like, why would you mess with somebody that way? You can't do that.
Who are we to do that anyway? I mean,
families do that to each other.
Do they? Yeah.
I think so sometimes. I mean,
funny story about my mom. Yeah. She wasn't particularly religious that I remember, but when she was dying, the one thing that she did do is that she invited a representative from pretty much every religion that was traveling through the hospital and visiting with people into her room.
Interesting.
She called it covering her ass.
Yeah. Why not?
Yeah.
Why not?
Rabbi, come on in.
Come on.
Priest,
I might be Jewish.
In.
I might be Christian.
Yeah.
That's great.
It's hilarious. Yeah.
I just want to pick back up on that one. Families do that to each other, I think, is kind of a harsh statement. I've also seen families be beautiful and loving and supportive and work together flawlessly at end of life. So
there's a whole spectrum of experiences.
Yeah, every single death is unique and different. We're all little snowflakes, but even on our deathbed.
But I could see how, weddings and funerals, that aspects of people come out.
Mm-hmm. Unresolved things come out.
And it can probably manifest in these tug of wars.
Yeah. And people don't know. And that was the other thing. When I've been a hospice volunteer a long time, I was a volunteer chaplain. And one of the things I saw is that people don't know how to walk into that room when there is somebody dying. They can't walk in clean and empty of their own stuff and to be completely present with what is true for that person in that moment. And I thought that was a shame. And that was an other ingredient I know that led to Wake Up to Dying.
Really?
Yeah.
Meaning that they put too much of themselves,
too much of ourselves
into the person who's dying, their experience, and it takes the focus away from them.
You don't know you're doing it, but when you are deathly afraid of death, when you go to sit with your mom or your dad when they are dying, you are not present for them. You can't be, because you haven't dealt with your own fears and your own concerns about death and dying. So you put all your stuff on them, subconsciously or not.
Yeah.
And I have seen it, and it's just people who are afraid to go in the room and won't, even if their loved one wants them there. And I've also seen people who are, forgive me, but hyper dramatic in that room. And that's not about the person who's dying either. Right? It's about them and their unconsidered feelings.
Yeah.
And so for the love of the person who's dying, find some sort of peace and understanding with your own mortality before you go into that room. That's advice.
Yeah.
And be present to what's happening, and don't presuppose anything. Don't presuppose what that experience is going to be like, because it is different every single moment. And you don't want to miss any of it by being clouded by your ego or your own fears or by what you've read and you think should be happening right here.
I've heard when people are really present, that they'll describe the death experience of their loved one as being a beautiful experience, that it was beautiful.
Yeah. I've certainly seen that happen. And, it's also the person's experience in the bed. I was very present with a friend's mother, and that friend's mother died she was so angry. And I was present, and that was not pleasant for me. It was tough. But, you're just holding the space. You're just being present, which is the most loving thing you can do. And you're not taking on their anger. It's their anger. They have to do that for whatever reason. That's what they were here to learn or didn't learn, or that's the last gasp of their spirit trying to get something out of this existence. I don't know. But I was very present, and I wouldn't say it was beautiful. I guess it was beautiful in its own way.
No, I'm not saying everybody's experience is beautiful, but people who've been able to be present,
yes,
they have described that it was a beautiful experience.
Yes. Yeah. And that too.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
I'm
I
just
think
saying
it's the
there's
whole
both.
spectrum. Oh
I
yeah,
agree.
no, I
agree.
think it's really triggering.
Yeah.
That whole stepping over the threshold of the room of a dying person,
Yes.
I think is a really hard step to take, because there's all this gray territory in there. What's going to happen? What's going to happen to me? What's going to be happening to this person that's dying? What am I going to say? Am I going to say the right thing, the wrong thing?
You can't say the wrong thing or the right thing, really. I mean, you can't, but.
No, I think you could probably say some pretty fucked up things. Like,
that's true.
You probably could.
I'll take that.
Make it really bad. I have a feeling.
If you have unresolved or unexamined feelings.
But even then, if you have unresolved stuff, then you cross the threshold into the room of the dying person, you probably wouldn't know. It would probably come out of the blue. You may not even have an awareness of it emerging and expressing itself.
No.
And there you have it, right? And then the birth of regret.
Yeah.
Because, when you get some distance from it, you look back and you're like, oh, shit.
Right. And
that didn't go well.
Yeah, and I want to try to do it differently. Right.
Yeah.
Hopefully they think like, when I die, I want to try to do it a little differently.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing. We are the wisdom. It's important for us to want to die well as we can, and to bring people in to that experience. I think that was another thing for me. I know this drove me to be a hospice volunteer. Many people died on me very quickly. Stroke, heart attack, or slowly, but I was out of the picture, like not invited into the inner circle to people who I cared about very much. And this was a series of deaths that I was sort of removed from and I wanted to be a part of. And that's when I said, I'm going to be a hospice volunteer, because I can be sitting around it or I can be invited into it. Culturally, we think we're supposed to keep people out of the experience. And I actually want to challenge that. I want to say, bring people into it and do it well. Do it openly and be vulnerable and show how it can be done well. We need to learn that from each other. I think that's really important. Stephen Jenkinson, I think, said, set a banquet for the community to come to experience a positive death. And so in that way we can be taught how to do it. And I think that's really important.
I love that idea. I'm imagining, based on my work with people over the years, especially as a psychotherapist, I'm imagining how challenging that could possibly be for a lot of people to show up in that way, because of all of the unresolved stuff they have around their own death, the idea they have around their own mortality, and then whatever issues they might have with the person who's dying. I'm trying to imagine having to do a quick course in awareness or something to try to do that well. It would be.
Well, you can show up and
do the best you can, I guess.
Bring food and, mow the lawn. I mean, there's all sorts of things to help with an end of life. It's just engaging more people in the process, I think, is really important, rather than circling the very interior wagons and cutting people out. Now, there's wisdom in that too, because it can be overwhelming. And this is your loved one's end, and you want to be with them and you want to have that time for yourself, which now I'm going to make a little plug for using an end of life doula, somebody who can be that gatekeeper for you, bringing in somebody into this experience in the community, somebody who can handle a crowd of people and have them schedule people for visits, have them schedule food, have them schedule dog walking, figure out what that person might want done before they die, like clean out the garage. There's usually something like that for somebody who's dying. I need to finish this. I need to get the shed cleaned out before I die. Yeah. So volunteers can do that for you. And that's a way to engage the community in the end of life process without being too overwhelming, meaning there's somebody who's appointed to take care of that for you.
And I imagine that some people who are dying don't want lots of people around.
They don't, maybe not in the room.
Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't know if that's what you meant. Like,
no,
50 people, come on in.
No. I mean, like, to the experience and able to help, given purposeful ways of helping in the experience, which can be overwhelming to the family because it's too much for them to manage.
Yeah, yeah.
But so, which is why I say bring in somebody who's willing, a friend, a neighbor, appoint somebody who's willing to sort of be that project manager for you. And I think in that way, share the experience with the community. But no, not necessarily in the room.
Okay,
No.
I guess I was taking that very literally.
Yeah. Well, I mean, lay the body out at home like we used to, and we'll get less, we'll get back to the way we used to do things where we weren't so removed. And that could be a benefit. That could definitely be a benefit.
Which gets back to your original vision.
Yeah, it goes back there. When that man asked me to project manage his death, that was one of the things that was so powerful about it. I managed like 26 different volunteers to do all those sort of things, those things I just mentioned: dog walking, food, cleaning, finishing the house. But only a few people were in the room ever. In fact, that was a conversation I had with him and his wife. Like, who's allowed to sit in this room with you? Who can be here when you're home, Mrs.? Not to be mean or anything, but there's certain people that you want in a room, certain people you don't. But that doesn't mean they have to be banned from the experience of helping at end of life.
Yeah, I like that.
And when I wrote an email to all those volunteers that it was time just for family, which ultimately it did become time just for the immediate family. We're talking right at the end, last 24 hours. I wrote a note to everybody and thanked them and shared a story with them. And I remember panicking in the middle of the night because I had written something that was sort of intimate about the family. And I woke up and I was like, oh my God, I should not have written that. That was awful. Who am I? Who do I think I am? And I remember getting up at like 2 or 3 in the morning, going to my email to look at what I had written, and saw that it was actually a beautiful statement that I don't even think I wrote. I think I was moved from spirits beyond that helped me craft that email that was so sensitive to all those people. And it was fine. And the other thing I noticed was that I had a number of thank you emails back for giving those people, and thank you for helping me find a way to be a part of that. Thank you for finding a specific way where I could contribute. Thank you for allowing me to be around death and dying in that way. And that was, again, right before Wake Up to Dying. At this point, I think Wake Up to Dying was an idea, but it hadn't yet really taken off. It just kept reinforcing that we have to bring people back to death and dying. We've been removed from it. We have nothing to gain by ignoring death and being removed from it, and everything to gain by engaging in it.
I love it.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, I think this has been a wonderful conversation.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Oh, no, thank you. Are you kidding me? Yeah. Well, I hope it's helpful.
Yeah, me too. I hope so too.
We'll find out, maybe, or not.
Hopefully we'll hear a little bit back.
Thank you, Nina.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks for swimming in the deep end with me and Nina. Man, I could have kept that conversation going for another 18 hours. Super enjoyable. If you found this conversation valuable and you want to support the Lucid Cafe podcast, you can rate it through whichever platform you listen to podcasts through. You can share it with others. Also, stop in at the Lucid Cafe Facebook page and say hello. Thanks for hanging out with me. See you next time.